I always believed marriage was built on trust. For over 20 years, I thought my wife and I had that trust. We lived in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio, surrounded by people who knew us as the perfect couple. But life has a cruel way of shattering illusions. It all started on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had left work earlier than usual because a meeting was canceled. I thought I'd surprise my wife by taking her out to dinner. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a car parked on the street. It wasn't a neighbor's car. It was sleek, expensive, not the kind of car someone around here would own. My gut twisted, but I tried to shake it off. I stepped into the house quietly, holding flowers in my hand. The sound of laughter floated from the living room. It wasn't just my wife's laughter, it was deeper, masculine. I froze in place, my heart pounding. I moved closer, each step heavier than the last. Through the crack of the door, I saw her. My wife, sitting on the couch, her hand resting on another man's knee. The man leaned in, whispering something into her ear. She laughed again, softer this time, and then kissed him. The flowers slipped from my hand. The sound made them both turn. Her eyes widened when she saw me. For a moment, the world stopped. I couldn't breathe. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The man stood up, adjusting his shirt, trying to look composed. I couldn't process it. My wife of 20 years, the woman I trusted with my soul, was with someone else. The betrayal burned like acid inside me. I turned and walked out the door. I didn't hear her calling my name. I didn't stop when she begged me to wait. I got into my car and drove. The rain blurred my vision, but not enough to wash away what I saw. I pulled over on a deserted road. My hand shook as I gripped the steering wheel. Tears spilled down my face. I screamed into the empty night. How long had this been going on? How many times had I been blind? I thought of our wedding day, the vows, the promises. The smiles, were they all lies? I couldn't shake the image of her laughing with him. The sound haunted me. The touch of her hand on his knee burned in my memory. I drove until the gas tank was nearly empty. When I finally got home, she wasn't there. Her car was gone. The house felt hollow. I walked through the rooms like a stranger. Every picture on the wall mocked me. Every memory felt poisoned. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her betrayal replayed in my mind like a broken record. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed answers. I couldn't live with uncertainty, so I called a private investigator. He was a retired cop, rough around the edges but sharp. I told him everything. He nodded slowly, like he had seen it all before. He promised me the truth, no matter how ugly. I agreed to pay whatever it cost. For the next few weeks, I lived in limbo. Every time my wife left the house, I wondered where she was going. She still smiled at me like nothing was wrong. She cooked dinner, asked about my day, kissed me goodnight, but I couldn't look at her the same. The pie called me late one night. He had photos. My heart dropped into my stomach. He asked me to meet him in his office. The next morning, I sat across from him, trembling. He slid a manila folder across the desk. I opened it with shaky hands. Inside were pictures of my wife. With the same man I had seen. Not just once, not twice, but over and over again. Different locations, different times, spanning years. My chest tightened as I flipped through the evidence. The pie cleared his throat. She's been seeing him for at least 20 years, he said quietly. The words shattered me. 20 years, the entirety of our marriage. All the anniversaries, all the vacations. Every birthday celebration, every family dinner. Every moment I thought was real. She had been lying. My whole marriage was a lie. The pie said more, but I couldn't hear him. My ears buzzed, my vision blurred. I stumbled out of his office into the bright sunlight. It felt cruel that the world was still turning. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. 20 years of betrayal, my mind spiraled into darkness. I thought of every sacrifice I had made for her. The long hours at work to provide, the times I held her when she cried. The nights I stayed awake with worrying when she was sick. It was all for nothing. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The rage boiled up inside me. I slammed my fists against the dashboard until they hurt. I screamed until my throat burned. But anger wasn't enough. I needed to do something. I needed to take control of the pain. That's when the thought entered my mind. Revenge. I wasn't going to be her fool anymore. If she could destroy 20 years of my life, I could destroy hers. The idea terrified me, but it also gave me strength. I drove home with a plan forming in my mind. She greeted me at the door with a smile. I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw a stranger. I didn't smile back. I didn't say a word. And deep down, I knew my life was about to change forever. I slept very little that week, the PI's folder resting like a stone on my chest. Every time she came near, my skin prickled with knowledge she did not deserve. I studied the photos until they felt burned into my memory. Her smiles in those pictures were the same smiles she used on me, but they belonged to someone else too. I began cataloging dates, locations, moments where our lives intersected with her lies. Each entry made the betrayal feel more tangible and less like a nightmare. I met with the PI again, asking for every scrap of proof he'd gathered. He warned me against hasty actions, saying revenge often feeds the wrong hunger. But the hunger was already there, sharp and refusing to be ignored. I started to plan, not out of malice alone, but from a need to reclaim my dignity. First, I secured legal advice, not to file immediately, but to know my options. A lawyer reminded me of privacy laws, defamation, and what evidence truly meant. She was efficient and calm, a steady voice in the storm. I felt oddly grown up sitting there, drawing lines around my broken life. Then I thought about who would hurt less. Striking publicly would break many things. I could expose her to friends, family, the town. Or I could take actions that left her with the truth and consequences quietly applied. The more I planned, the more complicated the morality of revenge became. I remembered my father's voice telling me to be better than the hurt done to me. Still, the thought of letting her keep her comfortable life without reckoning felt unbearable. So I mapped out a course that would make the truth unavoidable for her, not a spectacle for strangers. I arranged for more surveillance, not to gather humiliation, but to build undeniable facts. The PI tapped into places I couldn't see, hotels, weekend cabins, faces from a past I didn't know. He found bank transfers, anonymous payments, and small signals that stitched a pattern. Each finding tightened the noose of certainty around my disbelief. I began to imagine conversations in my head where I demanded answers and got none. Some nights, I wanted to confront her immediately, to fling the folder at her feet. But patience, ugly and bitter, became a tool I learned to wield. I started telling no one, wearing a mask of ordinary life while steel built inside me. At work, I answered emails, led meetings, and hid the trembling hands that wanted to smash everything. My colleagues noticed little, and I preferred it that way. Secrets kept their sharpness in silence. Outside the house, life moved with its gentle cruelty, birthdays and grill smoke and soccer games. Inside, my home felt like a stage set where I was playing a role I had not auditioned for. I watched her gestures, cataloged small lies about where she'd been, and stored them like ammunition. When she asked if I was okay, I simply nodded and repeated the practiced half-truth. Every time she reached for my hand, it felt foreign, like touching a borrowed coat. But I kept going, because the plan required time and the right moment. I started a private bank account to fund the steps ahead, severing money trails she might watch. At night, I reread the PI's notes and visualized outcomes that would leave her with reality to reckon with. I told myself revenge was for my closure, not her punishment, though the lines blurred often. In the quiet hours, I wondered about the man she had been with, his life, his families, his knowledge. Was he just a face that satisfied her appetite, or a partner in a long deception? The PI suggested discreetly contacting people around him, building a circle of corroboration. That felt like assembling witnesses for a truth that deserved hearing. Assembling the pieces felt oddly restorative, as if my hands were mending something invisible. I avoided making abrupt, obvious moves. I needed sustainable consequence, not a fleeting triumph. I contacted an accountant the PI recommended to trace finances tied to the affair. The accountant found transactions that made the pattern undeniable and ugly. It wasn't just passion. There was care, expense, and a parallel life maintained with deliberate effort. The evidence thickened into a tale no reasonable person could ignore. Once I had the ledger footprints, my options opened wider. The lawyer advised on divorce timing, custody, and how to shield myself from countersuits. She reminded me that law could be blunt, but it could also be a scalpel if used right. I started preparing emotionally for disclosures I could not take back. There were moments I broke down, sitting in my car, letting the anger wash out in ugly sobs. Those were the nights when the plan felt like an impossible mountain. But each morning the mountain seemed climbable, step by step. And step by step, I made calls, arranged meetings, and gathered allies for the truth. There was a woman at work who always made saucy jokes about his type of men. I thought of warning her, but chose instead to move carefully, not to drag innocence into public ruin. The pie uncovered a small insurance policy taken out under a different name, a thread that connected quiet payments to secrecy. That single discovery made my resolve harden. The life she led was built on deliberate falsehoods. I imagined the look on her face when all the threads became visible and tidy in my hands. Would she beg? Would she lie? Would she finally recognize the damage done? Questions lived in me like embers, warming and dangerous. I began drafting a letter for her, not the one I would send in heat, but a statement to guide the moment I unleashed facts. It was composed coldly, with facts listed, not flourishing. I planned how to present it so that dignity did not vanish from me in the process. A friend suggested a quiet option: give her copies of the proof, then walk away, let her live with knowledge, but without spectacle. Another friend pushed for public exposure. They wanted the town to know, to shame her into remorse. I listened to both and felt the tug of vengeance and fairness. At last I decided to balance private reckoning with public record, if necessary. I would give her the truth, then allow legal steps to follow if reconciliation failed. The thought of legal papers, of monies and signatures, made my stomach turn. Yet there was a rigid satisfaction in sense of order, facts followed by consequence. I rehearsed the conversation I would one day have with my children, should they ask. We had never had secrets about honesty in our family. I needed to preserve that ethic. I bought a new notebook and began to write notes for them, careful, clear, not spiteful. One afternoon, the pie called. He had identified evidence that her lover had another family across state lines. This added a jagged new layer to the betrayal. Not only my wife was deceived, but perhaps others too. The complexity of moral consequence tightened around my throat. I thought about the other woman's face, the innocence that might exist there. My anger shifted, gaining compassion's unexpected tilt, but not enough to stop me. I photographed every relevant paper, duplicated records, and sent copies to a secured drive. Digital backup felt like armor in the modern age. At home, I planted a small seed of normalcy. I baked bread and set it on the table, if only to remember routine. She noticed the loaf and praised it. I smiled with practiced warmth, all while the plan continued. A Sunday came when she suggested a simple afternoon drive, and I agreed without hinting at the storm beneath. She chatted about trivial things, blissfully unaware the world I had built in the background. The timing felt right. I handed her the printed folder on the kitchen table. Her face read the first line, and then crumpled, as if someone had shoved a knife into her ribs. She read faster, eyes frantic, breath shallow. For a moment she sat stunned, then covered her mouth with her hand. "No," she whispered, barely audible. I waited for anger, for pleading, for a story to repair the torn fabric. She looked up finally, and I saw shame, then something like fear. "Why?" she asked, voice small and broken. There was so much to say, but I had rehearsed only facts, not the theater of emotion. I told her calmly what I had learned, line by line, not to destroy, but to ensure clarity. She broke down, because grief and exposure do that to a person used to secrets. I handed her the phone number for the pie and the name of the accountant. She clutched the folder like proof of a life she had disguised. Her apologies came in waves, hollow and true by turns. But words now were a currency spent too freely to mend the ledger of our years. I told her I would need time and answers before any decision about us could be made. She begged for immediate reconciliation. I only asked for truth to be complete. Over the next days, she disappeared for hours, calling unknown numbers, trying to stitch explanations. I watched from a careful distance, my own pain raining down in quieter torrents. Neighbors whispered. The town noticed that something had changed in our household. I filed the copies I had made into a secure folder labeled simply facts. My life felt like a courtroom where I had to present evidence before emotion. And emotion, it turned out, had its own slow justice to deliver. I expected drama when she finally returned to the house with eyes hollow and red. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and began to speak slowly. Her confession was messy, a tangle of reasons, excuses, and long-buried regret. She named names sometimes, other times she fell silent, unable to remember. There were stories of loneliness and unmet needs, and of a man who had been present in dark hours. I listened with half my heart and gave none of it the power to sway the facts. Her tears were real, but they could not dissolve 20 years of choice. She asked if I could forgive. I answered that forgiveness might be possible, but not yet. The community started to circle us with curious, sympathetic eyes. Old friends called with thin voices, offering support that felt like glass. Our children, distant adults now, asked questions that made me ache with responsibility. I met with the lawyer and began to file initial paperwork to protect assets and rights. It was a pragmatic step that felt like armor for the future. She accused me once, briefly, of wanting to punish rather than understand. I told her the truth. I wanted to know the whole truth before choosing anything. She offered to end the affair and seek therapy. I watched to see if her steps matched words. She did make changes, fewer late nights, more presence at home, and yet the silence between us remained thick. I set up boundaries, separate sleeping arrangements, financial transparency, difficult conversations. Some days I wanted to call the whole thing off and run back to the man I used to be. Other days, I steeled myself and reminded myself of the dignity I deserved. The pie found more records linking payments to that other man, and with each new page the picture darkened. I considered confronting him directly, but the lawyer advised restraint. Pride can ruin a case and a man. So I channeled the anger into orderly steps, evidence, counsel, and careful communication. My exasperation sometimes cracked into cruelty, and I would repent quickly for that smallness. I started seeing a therapist recommended by a friend, someone to help me separate justice from revenge. Talking aloud did not ease everything, but it slowed the hurt enough to make reason possible. We debated whether to tell our children fully now or wait until we had a plan. In the end, we chose honesty, but with compassion, a hard balance to strike. The eldest child came home in shock, then anger, then withdrawal. We met around a table and spoke in clear, simple terms, allowing them to ask questions, not to judge. They needed time, as did I, to digest a truth that rearranged their childhood memories. I worked on myself, attending meetings at the community center and finding small purpose in helping others. Serving lunch to lonely seniors felt like a balm for my wounded dignity. The town's whisper grew into a murmur, then settled into a quiet that allowed life to continue. She attempted to make amends with people she had deceived. Some accepted, others did not. I watched her try to reconstruct a life that had been built on shaky ground. There were nights I sat alone watching television until morning, companioned only by grief. Then there were mornings when I felt lighter, because action had replaced passive suffering. I drew up plans for a possible divorce, not out of vengeance, but to preserve what remained of my life. I reminded myself that law was not cruelty if it protected a man from further harm. Her lover's wife, it turned out, was unaware for years, and when told, the household fractured elsewhere as well. News traveled slowly, and soon other pieces fell into the open like fruit from a shaken tree. I felt no joy at that collapse. Instead, I felt the complicated sorrow of many lives wounded. To my surprise, some people sided with her publicly, citing years of kindness I had also known. This complicated the narrative, reminding me that people are rarely wholly villain or saint. I tried to hold both truths. She had inflicted harm, and she had been human too. Over time, the rawness of rage cooled into a clearer resolve to build a future I could respect. I began to date practical tasks, sorting photos, closing shared accounts, reclaiming small comforts. In small ways I rebuilt, a new chair in the living room, curtains that let in more light. I found solace in routine and the simple dignity of living honestly. Some nights, anger returned like a tide, but each time it receded faster than before. I wrote a letter I never sent, a clean accounting of what had happened and what I felt. Writing without the intent to send was a release valve that steadied me. She started attending therapy too, not for my benefit, but for hers, attempting to understand why she'd chosen secrecy. Therapy pulled up old wounds for her, and seeing her face her past did not extinguish my pain, but it softened its edges. Our children began to visit less frequently at first, then more, when they saw genuine shifts in both of us. Slowly, life rearranged into a new shape, one that held the scars but did not worship them. I began to notice that my mornings no longer started with dread. There was still pain, but it had dulled into something survivable. She tried to show small gestures of care, but I watched them with a distant eye. Trust was not a switch to flip back on, it was a structure, and ours had collapsed beyond easy repair. I met with the lawyer again to discuss finalizing certain steps. The paperwork felt less frightening this time, more like an act of taking control. I knew the road ahead would be complicated, but I felt steadier. The therapist reminded me that healing was not about erasing scars. It was about walking forward, even when the scars still ached. I joined a local hiking group to force myself outside. Walking through forests, breathing air untainted by lies, gave me strength. One of the men in the group shared his own story of betrayal. Listening to him made me feel less alone. We compared wounds like veterans of an unseen war. The companionship of strangers felt more honest than the home I lived in. I began journaling more consistently, recording not just pain, but moments of gratitude. Some days gratitude was as small as sunlight through the window. Other days, it was the laughter of a child I passed on the street. Life reminded me quietly that it still contained beauty. At home, she tried to open conversations about reconciliation. I listened, but my answers remained cautious and measured. The years of deception could not be erased with weeks of apologies. I told her that actions mattered more than promises. She nodded, though tears often followed. The community began to stop asking about us, accepting that our marriage had changed. Rumors died down as people moved on to other stories. That anonymity was a gift. I poured myself into small projects around the house. Fixing the deck, repainting the garage, repairing the fence. Each nail driven felt like reclaiming territory. My therapist asked me once, "What do you want your life to look like 5 years from now?" The question stunned me, because for years I had not looked beyond tomorrow. I pictured a life not defined by betrayal. Maybe a new city, maybe new love, maybe just peace, but I knew I wanted dignity above all. I began researching retirement options and places I might eventually move. The idea of starting fresh grew less terrifying and more exciting. I also explored volunteer opportunities, feeling drawn to service. Helping others gave my suffering meaning. Meanwhile, she continued therapy and offered transparency with her time and money. She showed effort, but effort alone could not rebuild shattered foundations. I remained civil, respectful, but distant. Some evenings we sat in silence, each lost in thought about futures that might no longer be shared. I prayed sometimes, not for reconciliation, but for clarity. Faith became less about answers and more about endurance. The truth was, endurance had carried me this far. I realized that revenge had given way to resilience. The folder of evidence still existed, but I rarely opened it now. It had served its purpose. The future no longer looked like a courtroom to me. It looked like open roads, untaken journeys, unexplored mornings. For the first time, I felt possibility instead of only pain. I considered dating again, though cautiously, like dipping a toe in cold water. Friends encouraged me, reminding me that life did not end at betrayal. One evening, at a community dinner, I met a widow named Elaine. Her warmth was quiet, not demanding, not intrusive. We talked about books, about weather, about grandchildren. There was no rush, no fire, only gentle companionship. I found myself smiling without forcing it. She invited me to a small gathering with her friends. I accepted, nervous but willing. The evening was filled with laughter and light conversation. Nothing romantic, nothing pressured, just human connection. I drove home with a strange warmth in my chest. It had been so long since I felt that way. I told my therapist about it, and she smiled knowingly. She reminded me that healing sometimes begins in unexpected places. Meanwhile, my wife noticed my lighter mood. She asked if I was seeing someone, suspicion in her voice. I told her calmly that I was rebuilding my life, piece by piece. Her face fell, but she said nothing more. That silence spoke volumes. Over the weeks, Elaine and I shared more time together. Coffee after church, walks in the park, phone calls that stretched past midnight. It was not love yet, but it was something living, something honest. And honesty had become the most precious currency in my life. My children met Elaine and saw the change in me. They remarked that I looked lighter, freer. It touched me deeply to know they approved. Life at home grew increasingly quiet, distant. My wife tried still, but we both knew the truth. The fracture was permanent. We began formal divorce proceedings with less anger than I expected. It was sad, yes, but also relieving. No more shadows, no more secrets, no more waiting. The paperwork felt like closing a chapter that had long since ended. Elaine did not push for anything beyond friendship, and that made her presence even more valuable. She was a steady hand on a storm-tossed ship. I found myself writing again, stories and reflections, not just journal entries. Words became a way to process, to make sense, to heal. And in those words, I saw the arc of my life bending toward hope. Pain was still there, but it was no longer the whole story. The scars became part of the narrative, not the ending. And I, at last, felt ready for whatever new beginning awaited me. I kept staring at the pile of papers on my desk. Every page felt like a piece of my soul being ripped apart. The private investigator had done his job too well. Dates, times, locations, there it was, all in black and white. 20 years of lies, 20 years of deception. 20 years of me being the fool. I clenched my fists, feeling the blood rush to my head. I wanted to scream, to break something, to make her feel the pain I was feeling. But instead, I sat in silence. I thought about our wedding day. How beautiful she looked in that white dress, how I promised to love her forever. How she swore the same to me. Was any of it real? Or had it all been an act from the start? I remembered the first time we danced together, the way she laughed at my clumsy steps, the warmth of her hand in mine. It felt like a lifetime ago. Now, all I could see was betrayal. I felt like a stranger in my own life. Like everything I believed in had been built on sand. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, then another, and another. But the burn in my throat couldn't erase the burn in my chest. I thought about confronting her right then. But I wanted to be sure. I wanted her to admit it. No more lies, no more hiding. I called the private investigator again. I asked him to dig deeper. I needed more than just times and places. I needed faces. I needed proof that even she couldn't deny. He agreed, said it might take a week. A week felt like a lifetime, but I agreed. When I hung up, I sat there in the silence of the house. Her perfume still lingered in the air. It made me sick. That same scent had been with other men. I wanted to throw away every reminder of her. But I didn't, not yet. I needed her to see what she had done. I needed her to see what she had destroyed. The days crawled by. I barely slept. I barely ate. I just waited for the call. Waited for the moment my life would shatter completely. When the phone finally rang, my hands trembled. It was the investigator. He said he had what I asked for. I met him at his office downtown. He slid a folder across the desk. I hesitated before opening it. I already knew what I would see, but nothing could have prepared me. There she was, my wife, in hotel rooms, in restaurants, in cars, with him, the same man, over and over. Someone I recognized, someone who had been in my home. A so-called friend. My stomach turned. I felt the room spinning around me. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had humiliated me for 2 decades. I closed the folder and slid it back. I didn't need to see any more. I drove home in silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight they hurt. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was there. She was home. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house, the place where we built our life. The place that now felt like a prison of lies. I finally walked inside. She was in the kitchen, humming to herself, like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't destroyed everything we had. "Hey, honey," she said, smiling. That smile cut through me like a knife. I didn't smile back. I just stared. She tilted her head. "What's wrong?" she asked. I set the folder on the table. Her smile faded, her face turned pale. She didn't even open it. She knew exactly what was inside. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The silence was louder than any scream. Finally, she whispered, "I can explain, but I didn't want explanations. I wanted the truth she had hidden for 20 years. I leaned closer, my voice low and shaking. "Explain it to me." Then, she broke. Tears filled her eyes, but even her tears felt like lies to me. And in that moment, I knew there was no going back. She sat down at the table, her hands trembling. The silence between us was unbearable. I kept my eyes locked on her, waiting. She finally opened her mouth, but her voice was barely a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." Those words made my blood boil. What wasn't supposed to be like this? I asked, my tone sharp. She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I never meant to hurt you," I laughed bitterly. 20 years, you never meant to hurt me." She flinched at my words, her hands clutched the folder on the table. I loved him," she admitted. The air was sucked out of the room. Loved him, not just an affair. Not just lust, love. The word echoed in my head like a hammer. I felt my chest tighten, like I couldn't breathe. "Loved him," I repeated, my voice cracking. She nodded slowly, my world collapsed even further. "Why stay with me then?" I asked, my voice shaking with rage. Her face twisted in guilt. "Because of the kids. Because of the life we built. I didn't want to destroy it." My fists clenched so tight, my nails dug into my palms. "You already destroyed it," I said. Her tears fell harder. She reached across the table, but I pulled away. I couldn't bear her touch. I stood up, pacing the kitchen. Every corner of the house screamed of betrayal. Every picture on the wall felt like a lie. "You made me into a fool," I muttered. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I couldn't stay there. I grabbed my keys and walked out. Her voice followed me. "Please, don't go. We can fix this." But I slammed the door behind me. Outside, the night was cold and unforgiving. I sat in my car, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. My chest felt like it was going to burst. The love of my life had been living a double life. And I was the last to know. I drove aimlessly through the city. Streetlights blurred through my tears. I ended up at a quiet bar downtown. I ordered a drink, then another, and another. The bartender gave me a worried look, but didn't say anything. I stared into the glass, seeing nothing but her face, the lies, the smile, the betrayal. A man sat next to me at the bar. He looked older, with tired eyes. "Rough night?" he asked. I let out a bitter laugh. "You have no idea." He nodded slowly. "Wife," he guessed. I looked at him, surprised. He shrugged. "Been there myself." Something in his voice told me he wasn't lying. For the first time that night, I felt like someone understood. We talked. He told me his story, how his wife cheated, how he thought his life was over, but somehow, he found a way forward. "It won't feel like it now," he said, "but you'll get through it." His words hit me harder than the whiskey. Could I really get through this? Did I even want to? When I left the bar, the air felt different. Still heavy, but with a hint of something else, possibility. I drove home slowly, rehearsing what I'd say. When I walked through the door, she was waiting. Her eyes were red and swollen. She rushed toward me, but I raised a hand. "Don't," I said firmly. She froze. I could see the desperation in her face. "We can go to counseling," she pleaded. "We can fix us." Her words felt empty. I shook my head. "You broke something that can't be fixed." Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto a chair. She sobbed uncontrollably, but I felt nothing but cold. I went upstairs and shut the bedroom door. For the first time, I locked it. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling. My mind raced with memories, both good and bad, every laugh, every kiss, every lie. And slowly, I realized this was the end of the life I knew. But maybe, just maybe, the beginning of another. The next morning, I woke up to silence. The house felt foreign, like it no longer belonged to me. I went downstairs, half expecting her to be gone. But she was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her coffee. She looked up when I entered. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. "Good morning," she whispered. I didn't respond. The word felt meaningless now. I poured myself some coffee and sat across from her. The air between us was thick with tension. "I didn't sleep," she admitted. "Neither did I," I replied. She looked like she wanted to reach for my hand, but didn't dare. "I'll do anything to make this right," she said softly. I sipped my coffee, avoiding her gaze. "There's no making this right," I told her. Her lips trembled. "You don't mean that." I leaned forward, my eyes finally locking with hers. "I mean every word." Her face crumbled as she buried it in her hands. I felt no pity, only emptiness. After breakfast, I left the house without saying a word. I needed air. I needed space. I drove out to the lake we used to visit. The one where we had picnics with the kids. Where we laughed and dreamed about the future. Now it felt like a graveyard of broken promises. I sat on a bench, staring at the water. The stillness was both comforting and haunting. I thought about the detective's words. About the evidence, about the years I'd wasted. I thought about my children. How would they see her if they knew? How would they see me if I stayed? The questions tore at my soul. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through old photos. Her smile stared back at me in every picture. A smile I once believed was only mine. Now it felt like a mask. My chest tightened, and I put the phone away. I sat there for hours, lost in thought. When I finally returned home, she was waiting. "Where were you?" she asked nervously. "Thinking," I replied. She bit her lip, unsure of what to say. "I can't lose you," she said desperately. "You already did," I told her. The words sliced through the air. She broke down crying again. I walked past her, heading upstairs. In our bedroom, I opened the closet. I grabbed a suitcase and set it on the bed. Her footsteps pounded up the stairs. "What are you doing?" she cried out. "Leaving," I said simply. Her face turned white. "You can't." I ignored her protests, pulling clothes from hangers. Her hands clutched my arm. "Please, don't do this. We can fix it." I shook her off. "You had 20 years to choose me." "You didn't." Her knees buckled again, and she sank to the floor. Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't stop packing. For the first time, I felt in control. I zipped up the suitcase. "This isn't my home anymore," I said coldly. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Where will you go?" I paused at the door. "Anywhere but here." I carried the suitcase downstairs. The house seemed to echo with memories as I walked. Every step was heavy, but necessary. When I opened the front door, she screamed after me. "Don't walk away, please." But I did. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. The sound of it shutting felt like the end of a chapter. I stood in the driveway, suitcase in hand, unsure where to go. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going back. I loaded the suitcase into the car. As I sat in the driver's seat, I took a deep breath. This was the first breath of my new life. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring at the road ahead. The silence inside the car felt heavier than the silence at home. For a moment, I wondered if I was making a mistake, but then I remembered the photos. The messages, the 20 years of betrayal. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. There was no mistake. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway. The neighborhood looked the same, but I felt like a stranger in it. I drove without a destination, just wanting to escape. The roads blurred beneath me as my thoughts raced. Memories kept flashing in my mind, her laughter at family dinners. The way she held my hand at church. The vacations we took, all of them tainted now. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel in frustration. How could she live a double life for so long? How could I have been so blind? The questions burned in me like fire. Finally, I pulled into a small roadside motel. The kind of place you stop when you have nowhere else to go. The neon sign flickered in the evening light. I checked in under my own name. The clerk barely looked at me, handing over a key, room 12. The room smelled of stale smoke and loneliness. I set the suitcase down and collapsed onto the bed. The springs creaked under my weight. For the first time in years, I felt utterly alone. I stared at the ceiling, wondering what tomorrow would bring. There was no plan, only survival. I pulled out my phone and turned it off. I couldn't bear to hear her voice or see her messages. That night, I tossed and turned, sleep refusing to come. Every creak of the motel echoed like a ghost of my past. When morning came, I felt drained but strangely free. I showered, dressed, and checked out. The clerk didn't ask questions, and I was grateful. Back in the car, I drove toward the city. Something inside me wanted answers, not from her, but from myself. I stopped at a diner along the way. The waitress smiled warmly, refilling my coffee without asking. Her kindness made my chest ache. It reminded me of what I had lost. Or maybe of what I had never truly had. As I sat there, sipping the bitter coffee, I made a decision. I would meet with the detective again. I needed the full truth, every last detail. I called his office, setting up another meeting. His voice was calm, professional. We agreed to meet later that afternoon. The hours dragged by as I waited. Finally, I arrived at his office. He greeted me with a firm handshake. "You want everything?" he asked. "Yes," I said firmly, "no matter how bad it is." "No matter what." He opened a thick folder. Inside were dozens of photos, reports, timelines. My stomach turned as I flipped through them. There she was, meeting him in hotels, holding hands in public, smiling in ways she hadn't smiled at me in years. There were receipts, gifts he bought her, trips they took together while I thought she was visiting family. It was worse than I imagined, every page cut deeper. I closed the folder, my hands shaking. "How long?" I asked. He hesitated. "Since the beginning," he admitted. My heart sank. So it was true, 20 years. A whole marriage built on lies. I stood up, unable to breathe. "Are you okay?" the detective asked carefully. I shook my head, but words wouldn't come. I left his office, folder in hand. Out in the parking lot, I leaned against my car, trembling. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. I opened the folder again, staring at one photo, her hand in his, her eyes lit with joy. Joy I thought was mine. In that moment, I knew one thing for certain. She had stolen my life from me, and I couldn't let it end this way. I drove until the city lights blurred into a ribbon of color. My hands steady as the miles slipped beneath the tires. Anger still lived in me, but it no longer ruled every thought. There was a new shape to my resolve, clearer, less frantic. I began sketching a life plan on a napkin in a roadside cafe. It was not just about exposing her, it was about reclaiming myself. I listed small goals: find a place to live, reconnect with friends, volunteer. Then I added something bolder: learn to trust again, slowly. The detective's folder remained on my passenger seat like a talisman. Sometimes I opened it just to remind myself that truth existed. But I didn't flip through it obsessively anymore. Control felt better than chaos. I found a modest apartment downtown, sunlight on the windows. The landlord was kind and asked few questions. The first night alone in that apartment felt like stepping into clean air. No photos on the wall, no whispers in the hallway, just room to breathe. I bought a second-hand lamp and set it by the window to keep the dark at bay. The city became my quiet ally, anonymous and indifferent. I started attending a local writers' group to channel the noise into words. Listening to other stories made my own seem less monstrous. I began to write the truth in fragments, notes that might one day be a letter or a book. Some days the pen felt heavy, other days it flew across the page. At the same time, I met with the lawyer to time next steps carefully. We discussed property, pensions, and how to protect what mattered. Legalese was boring, but it was armor, and I learned to wear it without shame. I reconnected with my eldest child over coffee, honest and unflinching. It was painful, but their presence reminded me of roots I could not sever. They thanked me for my candor and promised to be present in whatever came next. Those promises warmed me in ways I hadn't expected. I started going to the community center regularly, serving lunch and listening to strangers. Their small stories of loss and comeback became a map of possible futures. One afternoon, a woman named Marge took my hand and said, "You'll find the sun again." Her certainty felt like sunlight breaking through a storm cloud. I enrolled in a woodworking class and found solace in sawdust and measured cuts. Creating something with my hands taught me patience and pride. A simple bookshelf later stood in my living room as a small monument to rebuilding. On quiet nights, I read old letters I had written to myself about hopes and dreams. They reminded me that I had been more than a husband or a betrayed man. I had been a person with passions. I dusted off the binoculars and returned to bird watching, a hobby I had abandoned years before. Watching a hawk glide reminded me that perspective can change everything. I did not seek revenge with malice, I sought truth and the dignity of closure. Still, I could not ignore a part of me that wanted justice to be visible and clean. I authorized the detective to send a certified letter to her, offering a final chance at full disclosure. It was a measured move, more of a test than an ambush. When she received the letter, her hands shook, and for once I saw fear in her eyes. She reached out to me, asking for a sit down to explain everything she could. I agreed, not because I expected healing, but because clarity deserved space. We met in a neutral place, a quiet cafe that hummed with ordinary life. She spoke in staccato pieces, revealing years of hidden pain, of feeling unseen, and of choices that calcified into habit. Her remorse was raw, but it could not rewrite the past. I listened, and then told her what I needed: truth, transparency, and time apart. She left the meeting shattered, but aware of the ruin she had caused. Walking away, I felt no thrill of triumph, only the steady beat of a man reclaiming his story. News of official proceedings moved slowly, like a distant train. People asked quiet questions, and I answered with measured honesty. Some neighbors expressed sympathy, others were awkward, unsure where loyalty should lie. I kept my public life calm and private life purposeful. The detective handed me one last folder with names and dates that closed the loop. I locked it away and, for the first time in years, did not feel compelled to reopen it. I mailed copies to the lawyer, meticulous and impersonal, and felt the burden lighten. With the legal steps underway, I allowed myself small pleasures again. A bike ride along the river brought wind into my face and laughter into my chest. I met Elaine more often, and our friendship deepened into a companionable tenderness. She did not rush me, or did she demand explanations. She simply offered kindness. Slowly, my heart opened to the possibility that love after betrayal could be kinder and truer. Work became less suffocating and more sustainable. Colleagues noticed the change. At home, I planted herbs in small pots and watched green shoots promise new life. I hosted a simple dinner with a couple of friends, and the conversation felt normal and warm. There were nights I still woke with raw pain, but they became fewer. In those vulnerable hours, I wrote letters I never sent, messages that allowed anger to drain away. The city felt less indifferent now and more like a landscape of small mercies. The legal separation became official on a rainy afternoon, with handshake formalities and paper sliding into folders. It was neither dramatic nor vindictive, it was simply truth recorded and accepted. When the papers were signed, I felt an odd relief, as if a storm had finally passed. Not everything had been resolved, but the path ahead was now mine to walk. I kept seeing the man from the bar in my memory, and I wondered if he ever felt happy again. Then I realized his words had taught me a simple fact: people survive. And surviving was the first step toward thriving. I began to dream again, small dreams at first: a weekend trip, a new book to read, a class to teach. They were ordinary, but to me they felt like treasures. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit on my apartment stoop and look at the stars, feeling gratitude for the lessons. They were hard and sometimes cruel, but they had forced me to become more honest with myself. The man I was becoming was not the same as before, but perhaps that was not a loss, it was a remaking. I discovered a small used bookshop tucked down an alley and spent hours there finding solace. The owner, a quiet man named Sam, recommended an old memoir that felt like a mirror of my life. I read until my eyes blurred, and the words stitched tender places together. I started attending a support group at the community center for people who had lost long-term relationships. Hearing others' stories reduced the sting and gave me tools to move forward. One night, I stood up in the group and shared a few lines from my journal. Hands found mine afterward, that human touch, solid and gentle, felt like permission to heal. Linda called once, asking if we could meet to discuss shared memories and practicalities. I agreed to one meeting, not to reopen wounds, but to plan for a clean separation. We spoke civilly, scheduling the division of assets and decisions about the house. There was no dramatic courtroom, just two tired people arranging the parts of a life to be sorted. The process was sorrowful, but dignified, and in that dignity, I found some peace. My children visited sometimes, their presence both comforting and instructive. We laughed together about small embarrassments from their youth, and those moments felt like balm. I began to mend friendships I had neglected, making time for neighbors and old schoolmates. They offered me normalcy and occasional distraction, and I learned to accept it gratefully. When Elaine surprised me with a homemade dinner, I felt seen in a gentle, human way. She did not attempt to replace what I lost, she simply walked beside me in the new days. The image of my previous life receded slowly, like a tide pulling back to reveal new shorelines. I kept a small ritual. Each Sunday, I wrote one page of gratitude things that survived the storm. It could be as small as a warm loaf or as large as a true friend. These pages reminded me that life held goodness even after deep betrayal. I began teaching a short evening class at the Center on Basic Woodworking, sharing what I'd learned. Watching someone carve a simple stool and beam with pride gave me a new kind of joy. I traveled for a weekend to a coastal town, and the ocean's vastness steadied me. There, by the water, I conceded that, while betrayal had stolen years, it could not steal my capacity to love again. Slowly, the idea of a future with someone who honored me began to feel real. I was no longer a man defined by the wrong done to him. I was a man defining his next chapter. The detective's name faded into an address in my contacts, a tool once vital, but now simply a line in history. I kept some photos, but not as ammunition, rather as testimony to what I had endured and survived. Sometimes I visited the river at dusk and let soft tears fall, not from fury, but from release. Those tears washed the face of a life that had been bruised and taught me to be gentler with myself. This gentleness earned and deliberate changed how I related to others and to myself. I began to imagine retirement differently, not as an ending, but as a stretch of time to craft a meaningful middle. Plans were modest: visits to the mountains, teaching, and more time with those I loved. On a bright morning, my eldest sent a message saying, "Proud of you, Dad," and I felt a quiet triumph. It was not the victory of revenge, but the victory of endurance and choice. I had not only survived betrayal, I had learned to stand taller for it. And in that standing, new possibilities unfurled like spring shoots reaching for sun. I woke up the next morning feeling surprisingly calm. The storm that had raged inside me seemed to have quieted overnight. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe it was acceptance finally taking root. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch. The sun was rising over the neighborhood, everything looked so normal. But I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I thought about the years wasted. I thought about the lies. And then I thought about what I wanted for the rest of my life. I didn't want bitterness to consume me. I didn't want to be a man defined by betrayal. I wanted to live, to feel, to laugh again. So I made a decision. That morning, I called a realtor. "I want to put the house on the market," I said. The house no longer felt like home. It was a prison filled with ghosts. The realtor came by that afternoon. She walked through the rooms, making notes. She didn't know the history of what had happened here. To her, it was just another property, but to me, every wall whispered lies. Every corner held memories I no longer wanted. By the end of the week, the sign went up. For sale. It felt like ripping off a bandage. Painful, but necessary. I packed up my belongings. I found old letters, photographs, little keepsakes. Each one was a dagger to the heart. But I forced myself to box them up, not to keep, but to let go. Some I threw away, some I donated, and a few I burned. Watching the flames consume them felt strangely liberating. Like I was taking back power. My children came by one evening. They sat in the empty living room with me. "We're proud of you, Dad," my daughter said softly. Her words made me choke up. "I feel like I failed you," I whispered. "You didn't," my son said firmly. "You loved us. That's what matters." Tears filled my eyes. They were right. Despite everything, I had given them love. And that was something my wife could never erase. The house sold faster than I expected. Within a month, I had a closing date. I found a small cabin by a lake upstate. It was quiet, peaceful, exactly what I needed. The first night there, I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon. The stars shimmered above me. The sound of water lapping against the shore was calming. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. I slept deeply, no nightmares, no thoughts of betrayal, just rest. The next morning, I went into town for groceries. The local store was small and cozy. That's where I first saw her. She was standing by the produce section, picking apples. She looked about my age. Her smile was warm. I caught myself staring. She noticed and smiled back. It was the first time in years a smile had made my heart skip. We exchanged a polite nod. I didn't expect anything more. But fate had other plans. 2 days later, I saw her again at the coffee shop. This time, she approached me. "Small town," she said with a laugh. I chuckled. "Yeah, seems like it." We introduced ourselves. Her name was Linda. She was a widow. Her husband had passed away 5 years ago. We talked for an hour over coffee. I found myself smiling, genuinely smiling. When I left, I realized something important. My story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days in the cabin grew brighter. I started each morning with coffee on the porch. The lake sparkled in the sunlight. Birds sang in the trees. For the first time in decades, I felt alive. Linda and I began to run into each other more often. At the store, at the post office, at the diner in town. Each time, our conversations grew a little longer. I found myself looking forward to seeing her. One evening, she invited me to a local community event. It was a fundraiser for the town library. I almost said no. Crowds still made me uneasy. But something in her smile convinced me. That night, I walked into the town hall with her. People greeted her warmly. She introduced me as a new neighbor. I shook hands with strangers. I laughed more than I expected. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider. After the event, we walked by the lake. The moonlight shimmered on the water. Linda told me about her late husband. Her voice cracked with emotion. I listened, truly listened. And I realized we shared something deep: loss. I told her about my wife's betrayal. She didn't pity me. She didn't judge me. She just understood. That night, I slept better than ever. The next day, I found myself humming while making breakfast. I hadn't done that in years. I called my daughter. She noticed my voice sounded lighter. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked. I smiled. "I think I'm better than okay," I said. She was silent for a moment, then she laughed softly. "You deserve that." Hearing her words warmed my heart. Linda and I began seeing each other regularly. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes for long walks. Sometimes just sitting on the porch, talking. The silence between us was comfortable. One evening, she brought over a homemade pie. We ate it with ice cream. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. I hadn't laughed like that in decades. Something in me was healing. Something I thought was gone forever. But it wasn't just about Linda, it was about me. I was rediscovering who I was, not as a husband. Not as a betrayed man, but as myself. I started painting again. I hadn't picked up a brush in years. The first canvas I painted was the lake at sunset. The colors poured out of me. It was like therapy. Linda saw it and gasped. "It's beautiful," she said. Her words filled me with pride. I realized I had talents, passions, dreams, things I had buried under years of pain. Slowly, I was reclaiming them, and with each step, I felt stronger. Linda noticed the change too. "You seem lighter," she told me one afternoon. "I feel it," I admitted. For the first time, I believed it. One night, we sat together watching the stars. Her hand brushed against mine. I didn't pull away, neither did she. We sat there, hands entwined, saying nothing. But everything was said in that silence. Something new was beginning. Something real. I wasn't rushing it. I wasn't forcing it. I was letting it grow naturally, and it felt right. One morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a man with lines on his face, but also with light in his eyes. I didn't see a victim anymore. I saw a survivor. I saw someone who had been broken and rebuilt. Life wasn't perfect. The scars would always remain. But scars don't mean weakness, they mean survival. And for the first time in so long, I was grateful to be alive. The seasons changed. Summer faded into fall. The leaves around the lake turned golden and red. Each morning, I watched them drift onto the water. It felt like a quiet reminder that life moves forward. Linda and I spent more time together. We drove to a nearby town for a festival. We listened to live music. We ate apple cider donuts. I caught myself smiling without effort. We took pictures together. When I looked at them later, I saw happiness in my face. Real happiness, not forced, not pretend. For a while, I feared it was too good to last. I worried I might lose her too, but Linda had a way of calming me. Her voice, her presence, her steady warmth. One night, I told her about my darkest moments. The nights I wanted to give up, the days I couldn't see a future. She held my hand and didn't let go. "You're still here," she whispered, and those 3 words felt like a victory. I realized I wasn't living in the past anymore. I was living now, and that was enough. Thanksgiving came around. My daughter invited me to her house. I hesitated. It had been years since we spent a holiday together. But I said yes. Linda encouraged me. "Family matters," she said. So I went. When I walked in, my daughter hugged me tightly. Her kids ran up shouting, "Grandpa!" I felt my throat tighten with emotion. For years, I had been absent, not physically, but emotionally. Now I was present, truly present. We laughed around the table. We shared stories. I told jokes I hadn't told in decades. At the end of the night, my daughter pulled me aside. "You seem different," she said softly. "Better." I smiled. "I think I finally am." Driving back, I thought about her words. Different, better. Yes, Linda waited for me with a warm smile. I told her about the dinner. She listened with shining eyes. "See, you're building again," she said. Her faith in me gave me strength. The first snow came in December. The cabin looked magical under white blankets. Linda and I decorated a small tree inside. We drank hot cocoa by the fire. We shared quiet laughter. It felt like home. On Christmas morning, I gave her a painting. It was the lake in winter. She gasped when she saw it. Tears welled in her eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Then she hugged me. That hug lingered. And in that moment, I knew I loved her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was steady, like the seasons. That night, I sat by the fire alone. I thought about my past, the betrayal, the years of lies. The pain that nearly destroyed me, but then I thought about now. The warmth, the laughter, the love. Life had given me a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. I closed my eyes and whispered a quiet thank you. Not to anyone in particular, just to life itself. For letting me find my way back. For giving me the courage to keep going. For reminding me that love can bloom even after devastation. That night, I slept peacefully. The new year began. With it, a new chapter of my life. I wasn't the man I used to be. I wasn't the man who was broken. I was someone new. Someone stronger. Someone alive. And for the first time in decades, I was excited about the future. Because it was mine again. Truly mine. The snow lingered well into January. Each morning, I shoveled the path to the lake. Linda would bring out coffee in 2 mugs, steam curled in the cold air. We stood there, sipping quietly, watching the frozen water. It felt like a ritual of peace. One evening, Linda asked me a question. "Do you ever think about forgiving her?" I knew who she meant, my ex-wife. I stared into the fire before answering. "I don't know if I can," I admitted. Linda nodded slowly. "You don't have to force it. Forgiveness comes when it's ready." Her words stayed with me. For years, I carried bitterness like armor. But now, that armor felt heavy, unnecessary. Did I want to forgive? Or did I just want to move on? The line blurred in my mind. I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew I was closer than ever. Life at the cabin became a rhythm. Work, laughter, quiet nights, shared meals. It was simple, but it was enough. One day, Linda fell ill with the flu. I stayed by her side, making soup, checking her temperature. She smiled weakly at me. "You're taking care of me better than anyone ever has." Those words touched something deep in me. I realized that love wasn't just passion, it was presence. It was consistency. It was staying when it was inconvenient. When she recovered, she kissed me softly on the cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. That small kiss meant more than any grand gesture. February brought Valentine's Day. I debated what to do. I didn't want to be cheesy, but I also wanted her to know how much she meant to me. So I wrote her a letter, handwritten, from the heart. I told her how she had saved me, how she had reminded me what it felt like to be alive, how she had given me hope when I thought it was gone forever. I left the letter on her pillow. When she read it, tears rolled down her cheeks. She hugged me tightly. That night, for the first time, we said the words, "I love you." It felt right, it felt true, and it felt like a beginning. I thought back to my marriage, to all the years wasted in lies, to the nights I wondered why I felt so alone. Now I understood. I had been starved of real love. And now, I had found it. March came with warmer winds. The snow melted slowly. We took long walks along the muddy trails. We talked about the future, about trips we might take, about books we wanted to read, about gardens we wanted to plant. Life felt open again. One evening, Linda asked me, "Do you ever regret hiring the detective?" I thought for a long time. "No," I finally said, "because without the truth, I'd still be trapped. And I would have never found this life." She squeezed my hand. Truth was painful, but it was also freeing. By April, flowers bloomed along the lake. I painted them in soft colors. Linda added some of them to her journal. We were building memories in layers, simple, ordinary, yet extraordinary to us. One night, as we watched the sunset, Linda whispered, "Do you think you'll ever marry again?" The question caught me off guard. I didn't answer immediately. I looked at her. At the way the fading light reflected in her eyes. At the way her hand rested gently in mine. And then I said, "Maybe. If it's the right person." She smiled, and in that smile, I saw possibility. A future I never thought I'd want again. The past didn't disappear, but it no longer defined me. I wasn't the man broken by betrayal. I was the man who survived it and built something new from the ashes. As spring unfolded, so did I for the first time. I believed I deserved happiness, and I wasn't afraid to hold on to it. May arrived with warm breezes. The lake thawed completely. We took the old rowboat out for the first time. The water shimmered in the sunlight. Linda laughed as she tried to paddle. Her laughter echoed across the lake. It was the sound of freedom. I hadn't laughed like that in decades. We drifted in silence for a while. Just listening to the water, just being. That evening, I grilled on the porch. Linda set the table with candles. We ate under the stars. The night felt magical. I thought about how simple life could be, and how beautiful. For so many years, I had been blind to it. Now I saw clearly. One afternoon, I received a letter. It was from my ex-wife. I hesitated before opening it. My hands trembled slightly. She wrote that she was sorry, that she had been selfish, that she regretted the years of lies. She asked for forgiveness. I sat with the letter for a long time. Part of me wanted to tear it up. Another part wanted to reply in anger. But instead, I closed my eyes. I breathed deeply. And I realized something important. I didn't need to carry that anger anymore. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean excusing. It simply meant I was free. So I let it go. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That night, I told Linda. She smiled softly. "You finally set yourself free," she said. And she was right. For the first time, my chest felt light. The past no longer owned me. June brought summer heat. Linda and I started a garden. We planted tomatoes, peppers, and flowers. Every morning, we watered them together. Watching them grow felt symbolic, like our lives were growing too. We hosted my daughter and her kids. They played by the water, laughed, ran barefoot on the grass. Linda joined them, chasing after the little ones. I watched, smiling. I thought, this is what family feels like. Not perfect, but real. That night, my daughter pulled me aside. "Dad," she said, "you seem happy, truly happy." I nodded. "I am." She hugged me tightly. "I'm glad you found someone who deserves you." Her words stayed in my heart. It felt like a blessing. The 4th of July arrived. Fireworks lit the sky above the lake. Linda leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. I wrapped my arm around her. We watched the colors explode in the night. And I thought about how far I had come. From betrayal, from despair, from loneliness, to this moment of peace, to this moment of love. Life had broken me. But it had also rebuilt me. Not the same man, but maybe a better one. August came with golden sunsets. We took long drives through the countryside. We sang along to old songs on the radio. Songs that reminded me of my youth, and I realized something. I wasn't old yet, not really. I still had years to live, years to love, years to grow, and I intended to use them well. As summer ended, I looked at Linda one evening. We sat on the porch, sipping wine. The crickets chirped in the background. I took her hand, and I asked her the question that had been in my heart. Would you marry me? Her eyes widened, then softened. She nodded slowly. Yes, she whispered. Tears filled my eyes, because after everything, after the lies, after the betrayal, after the pain, I had found love again, real love, and it was mine to keep. The days leading up to the wedding were quiet. We didn't want a big event, just something simple, something true. We chose to hold it by the lake, the place where everything had started for us. Where healing had begun, where love had grown. My daughter helped with the arrangements. Her kids gathered wildflowers for decorations. It felt perfect. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up early. The lake was calm. The sun rose in soft pink hues. I stood on the porch, taking it all in. I thought about the man I used to be, the man who had discovered betrayal. The man who thought his life was over, and I realized how far I had come. I wasn't broken anymore. I was whole. Later that day, Linda walked toward me in a simple dress. She looked radiant, not because of the dress, but because of the light in her eyes. When she reached me, I felt tears gather in mine. We held hands as the officiant spoke. His words felt less like ceremony and more like truth. When it was time to say our vows, I spoke from the heart. I thought love was lost to me forever, I said. But you showed me it was still possible. You gave me hope. You gave me life again. And I promised to spend the rest of my days cherishing you. Linda's voice shook as she replied. You taught me that love has no age, that healing is real. And that sometimes the best part of life begins when you least expect it. I promise to walk beside you through all the seasons we have left. When we kissed, cheers rose from the small group around us. My daughter wiped tears from her eyes. The children clapped and shouted. It was a moment of pure joy. Afterward, we celebrated on the porch. Simple food, laughter, stories, love. That evening, as the sun set, I stood with Linda by the water. The reflections of the sky shimmered across the lake. We held hands in silence. No words were needed. Everything was understood. That night, as I lay beside her, I felt peace, not just happiness, but deep, abiding peace. I thought of all the pain I had carried. The years wasted in lies, the anger that consumed me. And I realized it was gone, truly gone. In its place was something greater, a life I never expected. A love I thought I would never find again. The next morning, I woke early. I painted the lake, the trees, and the rising sun. It felt like a new beginning on canvas. Linda watched quietly. You found yourself again, she said softly. And she was right. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, really living. The days that followed were filled with warmth. We tended the garden together. We shared meals with family. We laughed often. Sometimes we sat in silence, simply holding hands. Those moments mattered most. Life didn't need to be grand. It just needed to be real. And now, it finally was. As summer turned to fall again, I reflected on everything. On betrayal, on despair, on the detective's report that shattered my world. On the nights I thought I'd never recover, and on the miracle of finding love again. The journey had been long, painful, messy, but it had led me here, to this place, to this peace, to this love. The crisp air of autumn filled the mornings. Leaves painted the ground in reds and golds. Linda loved to walk through them. Her laughter echoed as the leaves crunched beneath our feet. I never thought I'd hear that sound in my life again. That kind of carefree joy. We raked piles with the grandkids. They jumped into them, squealing. Life felt lighter, simpler. I cherished every second. Some nights, we sat by the fire, telling stories, remembering the past. Dreaming of the future, it wasn't about big plans anymore. It was about the little things, a cup of coffee together, a shared glance across the table, a gentle hand squeeze when words weren't needed. My daughter noticed the change in me. "You're smiling more these days," she said, and she was right. I hadn't realized how heavy my face had been before, always weighed down by bitterness. Now, I smiled without effort, without force. One afternoon, Linda found me painting. I was working on a portrait of her. "You've made me look younger," she teased. I grinned. "No," I replied. "That's how I see you." Her cheeks flushed. She kissed me softly. The painting remained unfinished. But maybe that was the point. Love was never meant to be finished, always growing, always alive. As the weeks passed, I began to reflect more deeply on the journey that had brought me here. I thought of betrayal, the kind that breaks you in half. The kind that makes you believe life is over, but life had surprised me. It had shown me resilience I didn't know I had. And love I didn't think I deserved anymore. Sometimes, I still dreamed of the past. The arguments, the lies, the moment of discovery. I would wake with my chest tight. But then Linda's hand would find mine. Her warmth pulled me back. Her presence reminded me the past no longer owned me. I was free. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, Linda whispered, "Do you ever regret it, the pain you went through?" I paused. I thought carefully. "No," I said at last, "because it brought me here. To you, to this life, and for that, I'd endure it all again." Her eyes glistened with tears. She rested her head on my shoulder. Outside, snowflakes drifted slowly. The world seemed quiet, still, at peace. That winter was beautiful. We decorated the porch with lights. The grandkids made snowmen in the yard. Laughter carried through the cold air. Inside, the fire warmed us, so did love. We weren't young anymore. We both knew that, but age didn't dim love. If anything, it made it brighter, more meaningful. Every day was a gift. Every moment was precious. I found myself writing more. Journaling about the past. The lessons I'd learned, the growth I'd found. It felt important to put it into words, for my daughter, for my grandchildren, for anyone who might someday need to know that healing is possible. That betrayal isn't the end, that love can return. One evening, Linda read one of my entries. Her hand covered mine. "You should share this," she said softly. "Someone out there needs to hear it." I smiled. "Maybe someday," I replied. For now, it was enough to live it, to feel it, to hold on to it. The winter gave way to spring again. Flowers bloomed along the lake. Birds returned with their songs. And I knew life had come full circle. Not back to where it was, but to something new. Something better, something true. Spring brought a warmth that matched my heart. Linda and I planted flowers together. She knelt in the soil with her hands covered in dirt. Her smile made even the weeds look beautiful. I laughed at myself for thinking I was too old for new beginnings. Life had other plans. One morning, my daughter came by. She hugged me tighter than usual. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she whispered. Her words nearly broke me. For so long, I thought I'd disappointed her, but she saw my strength now. And that meant everything. We had long talks over tea. She asked me questions about love, about betrayal, about forgiveness. I told her the truth. That betrayal cuts deeper than any knife. That forgiveness doesn't erase the scar. But scars can remind us we survived. She nodded quietly. "I needed to hear that," she said. I realized then my pain had a purpose. It wasn't just for me, it was for those I loved. For those who might stumble in the same darkness someday. Evenings with Linda became my sanctuary. We watched the sun sink behind the trees. The sky painted itself in oranges and purples. Her hand always found mine, and in that silence, I found peace. One night, I dreamt of my ex-wife. She looked the same as before, but her eyes carried regret. In the dream, she tried to speak, but no words came out. I woke up uneasy. For a moment, I felt the old bitterness. Then I turned to Linda beside me. Her gentle breathing soothed me. And I knew dreams couldn't hurt me anymore. The past had lost its grip. Still, I wondered about my ex. Did she ever think of me? Did she regret the years she threw away? Maybe, Maybe not, but it no longer mattered. Her choices were hers, mine were mine. And mine had led me here. One afternoon, Linda surprised me with a picnic. We sat by the lake where we first met. The water sparkled in the sunlight. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked. I smiled. "Every day." But not with fear anymore, with hope. She leaned her head against my shoulder. We ate in silence, listening to the gentle waves. The future didn't scare me, not when she was in it. I began to notice small things more, the way her laughter carried through a room, the warmth of her hand on mine, the sound of birds at dawn. These little moments became treasures. Proof that life was still rich, still beautiful. One day, I found myself back at church. It had been years. The stained glass glowed in the sunlight. I sat quietly in the pew. I didn't pray for answers, I prayed in gratitude. For survival, for love, for second chances. Tears slid down my cheeks. I didn't wipe them away, they belonged there. They told my story, better than words ever could. Later, Linda found me sitting outside. "You look lighter," she said softly. And I was, because I had let go of the anger, of the resentment, of the endless what-ifs. I was done carrying them. I wanted to walk forward unburdened, and I was. The next months were filled with joy, family dinners, walks by the water, quiet evenings with books and tea, simple, beautiful moments. I realized this was what happiness really was, not grand gestures, not riches, but presence, connection, love. As summer rolled in, I celebrated my birthday. The whole family gathered, even the grandkids made me a cake. I looked around the table, at faces filled with love. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. The man who had been broken was no longer broken. He was healed, he was alive, he was loved. The day after my birthday, I sat on the porch. The summer air was thick with the smell of cut grass. Children's laughter drifted from the street. I thought about the years I had wasted in sorrow, and the years I had gained in healing. It struck me that life is not measured in decades, it's measured in moments. And I finally had moments worth remembering. Linda brought me a glass of lemonade. She kissed my cheek softly. "Happy birthday again," she whispered. Her presence was a gift greater than any wrapped box. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote about the pain, about the betrayal, about the long nights when I thought I was finished. But most importantly, I wrote about the rise, the climb back to life, the discovery of love when I thought it was gone, and the truth that no one is ever too old to begin again. As I wrote, I felt something loosen in my chest. It was peace, pure and simple, the kind I thought I'd never feel again. I knew then I had to share it, not just with my family, but with anyone who would listen, because stories heal. And maybe mine could help someone still in the dark. Weeks later, my daughter asked me to speak at her community group. She said, "Dad, people need to hear your journey." I hesitated, but eventually, I agreed. Standing before strangers, I felt my heart race. I began softly. "I once thought my life was over when my wife betrayed me." The room grew silent. Eyes fixed on me. I told them everything, the betrayal, the nights of loneliness, the rage, and then the slow, painful healing, and finally, the joy of finding love again. When I finished, there was silence again. Then applause, but it wasn't the applause that moved me. It was the tears in their eyes. People understood, because pain is universal. And so is healing. Afterward, a man approached me. His eyes were red. "Thank you," he said. "My wife left me last year. I didn't think I could go on. But hearing you, I see there's hope." I hugged him without hesitation. That night, I realized something. My suffering had not been wasted. It had been transformed into something bigger than me. Into a message of survival, into a beacon for others still lost. Linda smiled when I told her. "You've found your purpose," she said. And she was right. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about helping others survive too. I began speaking more often. At churches, at community centers, even at retirement homes. Each time, I shared the same truth. That betrayal hurts, that it feels like death. But it doesn't have to be the end. Life continues, love returns. And sometimes, the second life is even sweeter. One autumn evening, I sat with my grandson. He asked me, "Grandpa, were you ever really sad?" I smiled softly. "Yes, I was. Very sad," he frowned. "But you're happy now." "Yes," I said. "Because sadness doesn't last forever. Even when it feels like it will." He nodded, as if filing that away for his own future. In that moment, I knew my story had done its job. It wasn't just for me anymore. It was for him, for all of them, for anyone who would one day face loss. And I would keep telling it, for as long as I had breath. The winter came again, crisp and quiet. I stood by the window, watching the snow fall gently. Each flake seemed like a reminder of time passing. I thought about the man I used to be, the one who drowned in anger and bitterness. The one who thought life had ended with betrayal. And I realized how far I had come, not just in finding love again, but in finding myself. Linda joined me at the window. She slid her hand into mine. Her warmth steadied me. We didn't need words. Silence was enough. A silence filled with peace, not pain. Later that evening, my daughter called. She wanted me to record a video message for her church group. I laughed softly. Technology had never been my strength. But she insisted, so I sat in front of a camera and pressed record. My face looked older than I remembered, but my eyes, they held something new, something alive. I began speaking. At one point, I thought betrayal had destroyed me. I paused, letting the truth settle. But betrayal was not the end, it was the beginning. I spoke about forgiveness, not for my wife, but for myself. I spoke about choosing to live again, about allowing love to return, about believing in tomorrow, even when today feels unbearable. When I finished, I whispered, "Thank you," to the camera. Not to the viewers, but to life itself. Linda wiped a tear from her cheek. "That was beautiful," she said. I smiled. It was necessary. Weeks later, I was invited to speak at a larger gathering. Hundreds of people sat in the hall. My hands trembled at first. But when I opened my mouth, the words flowed. I shared the story once more, every detail, every scar, every lesson. The audience listened in silence. Some nodded, some cried. When I finished, I ended with one truth: we're never too broken to begin again. The applause shook the hall. But it wasn't pride I felt, it was gratitude for having survived, for having found purpose in the wreckage, for being alive to tell it. That night, Linda held me close. "You've turned pain into a gift," she whispered, and I knew she was right. My past no longer haunted me. It had become a foundation, one that supported a new life and a stronger man. The following spring, I planted a tree in my yard, a symbol of growth, of renewal. Every morning, I watered it. And every morning, I whispered a simple prayer. Let me keep growing too, because healing never truly ends. It just deepens. Years later, that tree grew tall and strong, just like me. And when I sat beneath it, I felt something sacred, a connection between pain and beauty, between endings and beginnings, between betrayal and love. I finally understood life's secret. It isn't about avoiding pain, it's about transforming it into wisdom, into compassion, into hope. So when people ask me how I survived betrayal, I told them this: pain is not the end, it is the doorway to a new self, to a new love, to a new life. And if I could walk through it, so could they. That became my message, the one I carried everywhere, the one I leave with you now. Life does not end with betrayal. Life begins again, stronger, wiser, fuller. And love always finds its way back.